microphone for translation? Perfect. So, hello, my name is Philip. I'm working at Knowledge Unlatched, as you might have heard already. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about how open access can be implemented for your business and how open access works for especially academic publishers. I looked at a few of you who signed up for the workshop, and as I see, most of you are from small publishing houses, universities, of course, a few, and most of these houses don't have an OA policy yet, so I'm very excited to have a little workshop with you and to show you how we're going to start with all of that. Oops. Yeah. So to get started, we will first of all start with a little understanding of open access. So what does it actually mean? I'm just giving you a little insights on what is going to happen. And after that, we're going to have a little workshop. So we are going to split you up in groups and tell you what to do. And then you can find a little bit of the insight, what is important to me, what is important for other players in the OA environment, and how we're going to proceed with that. And afterwards, to the end, we want to do a little checklist and a little evaluation of what you as a publisher might need and what is good for your future planning to have a sustainable model rolling. Okay. So first of all, how and why do we have open access? It basically started with the content being born digitally. So we're all working on our computer, we are using our computers to produce it, we're using our computers to edit it, and we're trying to make everything digitally. Almost nobody is using his paper to produce a scientific paper anymore. So therefore, everybody was working online, everybody used research online, everybody used the papers online, and so the demand for digital content that is also born there was just very, very high. So how did open access come into it? It's a little bit like the music industry, if you want. In the music industry, you all of a sudden had Napster and all sorts of platforms where you could just access and share everything. And everybody started to use it, and you couldn't get a hold onto it. So the business had to react to that. And this is somewhat what the publishing scene tried to implement as well. So you had it as somewhat of a political initiative back in the days, I would say, when the journal crisis came up in the 1990s, where a lot of journals and a lot of, especially the libraries, were very unhappy with the amount of money they had to pay for subscriptions, etc. So it was more or less a set out to a new form of sharing knowledge and not being dependent on the big publishing houses. Sven also told you a little bit about that earlier. And so the biggest point is, if we have the possibility to publish our journal articles or our books and monographs open access, we also have a bigger impact on it. So the more people can access your research, the more people can actually work with it. And you get a bigger recognition, and authors win a lot from it. So how big is open access actually? Open access, the whole scholarly market is about $27 billion US, most of you know that. And open access is more or less a very small part of it. Only 500 million, well, only 500 million US, and with the biggest growing rate on the other hand. So 15 to 30% of open access content is being added every year. So we see the highest potential of actually making money in new fields of academic publishing in open access. So as we see it evolving more and more, it is definitely a strategy that you should focus on implementing into the future. And how do publishers so far realize these business models, and how do publishers make money out of it? That is the most important part. Open access doesn't mean that a file is being uploaded somewhere, doesn't has no future, is not being looked at, but open access is about having research that is being distributed and that people make money with, of course. So the three biggest and almost exclusive funding mechanisms for open access so far are, on the one hand, article and book processing charges. Article processing charge, the name basically says it. It means that per article that is being published, there is a processing charge, which means if your research is being handed into the journal, then the publisher says we have to clear all rights for the images, we have to edit the text, especially in HSS. There's a lot of work that needs to be done through it, and of course the publisher also has to distribute it. And this is all being processed with the article processing charge. It's used by almost 12,000 journals and almost as many books. Most of them are being indexed in the DOAB, which means Directory of Open Access Books, and the DOAJ, which is the Directory of Open Access Journals. The APCs can vary depending on what your journal is. So for a very small niche journal, which not that many people read, it might be below 100 or around $100 US. If you, of course, want to publish in a very renowned journal, then the publisher says, if you want to publish with us, you have to pay 3,000 euros as an APC, which is mostly because, of course, they have the better distribution and everything, but as with every other journal and traditional models, a more prestigious journal also can ask for a bigger price or a higher price. That's basically it. BPCs are somewhat different in terms of a minimum BPC for every publication would be at around $3,000 US. Because you have a whole book, it's just more work as a article. Most of you know that. And of course goes up to $16,000 if you want. Then these APCs and BPCs make up 90% of the open access funding in the market. And they mean these charges are somewhat transparent, meaning that the publisher can say, this is what I have to do to make your research open access, and so you have to pay the cost. It is a nice way because it makes something more transparent if it's adjusted right. Then you have the library funding. That means that the libraries, they don't just buy subscriptions anymore. They don't just go out and go to Elsevier and buy a big deal, but they rather come together and finance a journal being open access. So, for example, what we at Knowledge on Ledge do, we conglomerate libraries from all over the world and give them a selection of journals and books, and then they can pledge on it. So there you see that the libraries continue to pay for the journal being open access, making it possible for researchers to publish in it and getting rid of APCs. That has the advantage that other than being behind a paywall, the content is generally available to everyone, and the libraries in that sense would have paid anyway, so why not make it open access for everybody who wants to read it, which is, in our opinion, quite nice. And the last thing, which is the lowest market share, are grants. Sven also said something about it a little earlier. For example, what UCL does and how they distribute their titles completely OA, or for example, the Mellon Foundation and some others. So they go out and fund research and fund all sorts of academic published content that they think is important for everybody to know. You can apply for the grant and then you get it. But that is so far the smallest amount. It's 2 to 3%. If Mellon goes out and pays 3 million for a lot of articles or books, that is already a lot. So it's really the smallest share. And so from the last slide, we learned that there's still a lot of different funding mechanisms out there, and a lot of people still discuss what is the best method. It's not completely settled. It really depends on what you want. And there are basically 3 different ways of categorizing open access: green, gold, and diamond. Green basically means that there's no financial transaction for publishers involved. It means that mostly if a publisher, if a researcher publishes something, then there's government law in Germany, for example, that is the case, and you have to make your content open access, for example, after a year or 2 years, depending on the regulations and the content you provide. And that just means that the author then publishes his content, his or her content, open access. It's the, I would say, lowest open access strategy because nobody really makes money out of that. And it's really providing knowledge without having a business model behind it, other than the paywalled period before becoming OA. So green is mostly something that researchers or publishers do after they have already made their share with it in a paywalled environment. Then you have gold. That is, as I explained before, funded by APCs or BPCs, and this is paid by the authors, mostly by the author's research institution or other funding background. And that makes it possible for the publisher to get all of his costs and his estimates on what they need to make out of this publication to survive and to make it profitable. And then it's being published open access. And diamond is, of course, if an institution, for example, Max Planck or something, or Learn Society, decides to make your publication open access, and all costs are basically covered, and the publisher can be sure that he makes nice money out of it, and everybody else also doesn't just give away his data. So that means that open access doesn't mean that it comes for free, but it really is a business model where publishers can make a lot of money, not only increasing their outreach and increasing the value of their content in the research market, but also with making it open access. So what happens after you decide to make your content open access? You basically have 2 levels. Either on the one hand have content, and on the other hand you have the metadata. As for the content, you have a hosting platform, for example, JSTOR and OAPN, library repositories, publisher platforms, and vendor platforms. These are the big 4 categories where the content is going to end up on. The hosting platforms, OAPN and JSTOR, if you don't know them, it's worth taking a look. It's basically where all of the open access content, or a lot of open access content, is being hosted and distributed to the metadata discovery systems. So what you have on the right side, where you see the metadata, those are systems where you can find all of the open access content. Starts with the DOAB I mentioned earlier, DOAJ for journals, and then you have different companies. For example, PaperHive, they have a website, they do research interaction, so you can access the file and then do comments and already work on the file. And of course, if it's open access, it's even nicer. And the others are probably somewhat familiar to you. If not, I can give you a list of them and you can look through them. They are basically like Google Books, Google Scholar. They're platforms where you can access them. Very interesting for the content side is, for example, providing your content on a hosting platform in contrast to a publisher platform. If you see, for example, Springer or De Gruyter, they have their own platforms where they host their content. So they actually have these platforms. Most other publishers, especially smaller and middle-sized ones, don't have their own platform to host their open access content. So therefore it's good if you use library repositories, hosting systems, or for example vendor platforms to get your content out there. We can of course, as Knowledge Unlatched, also help you with that, and we will in the workshop discuss a little bit how you have the options of distributing your content right. So coming to the point, who are the players in the market? There you have publishers, researchers, funders, and libraries. That is pretty much the essence of academic publishing as we all know it, and also the essence of what open access is about. You have on the one side, of course, the publishers, which is mostly you, who care, of course, about their value and reputation, and for good reasons, their profit. This is something that we also are very focused on acknowledged open access is not free, and it's nice when publishers make money with open access because it helps everybody to have quality content, to make sure that the content can be distributed in the future. And if developing sustainable business models for publishers is therefore very important for the market. The researchers, of course, they want the access to their data. They don't have a lot of impact if it's never found and never seen by anyone. So they really take care, or they care when it comes to open access about the increased usage of their titles. For libraries and funders, they are in some cases in the same boat, depending on the business model. I talked a little bit about it earlier. For libraries, they of course want the security and the sustainability. Coming back to the journal crisis, they don't want to pay a huge amount of money for journal articles they have to pay over and over again. They really prefer to have a fair pricing and a transparency, and also somewhat of an autonomy and not be dependent on big deals and big publishers. And that is, I think, something, for example, we see that in Sweden, in Germany, and some other countries. They are somewhat sliding away from the big deals, or they're going more and more into the opposition and don't want to just take in the deals they're being offered, or because the only option with big deals is either you have access or you don't, and you need the access, otherwise you're not part of the important research that is being done, and so they have no choice other than basically going into it and finding systems that help them creating sustainable business models outside of this big deal is very important for them. And for the funders, they of course want lower cost than a huge journal and a big deal, and impact as well as science marketing. This is basically why they do it. So, coming from these four players, you can somewhat recognize the color that these four have, and my colleague Sven handed out some nice cards to you, which should be complementary to these colors. And I would like you to come together in groups now, of course, with these colors. So I would say yellow, as for the funders, is finding themselves in the back here, and publishers, as in red or pink, find themselves back there. Researchers up here in the front, and the libraries up here in the front. Perfect. Yeah, so everybody with a pink card, go back into the right corner. You can scoot the chairs as well. I talked to them, it's okay. Just build little circles and find yourselves in groups. Okay, I see that worked fine already. Thank you very much. And what I would like you to do now is to get into the role of your group, so to speak. For publishers, that might be easier, but if you have these four groups, then you see what they basically want and what their needs are. And I prepared these 4 questions, and I hope everybody can read and understand them. And for the first one, what are your priorities in implementing an open access policy? From the perspective, just what you think is important for researchers, libraries, and funders, etc. And I would like you to write down the catchwords that you find on these flashy cards that you got from Sven as well. Exactly. And to make it, to think about what you want. And we come together in like half an hour, and then we present one after another what your research results are. And you should have all of the questions, these questions, you should have them on paper as well. Is that correct? Okay, great. So I will show you back these slides. I will come around and discuss with you a little bit what might be good, and you can jump into your perspective and think what is important for an OA policy for you. Okay, get started.
Does everybody know what you are, respectively?
Oh yeah. Do you know which group you are?
Good. So we don't have 5 publishers after.
Okay.